Unit 11 Partition of Bengal and the Swadeshi Movement. Structure 11.0 Objectives 11.1 Introduction 11.2 The plan for the partition of Bengal 11.3 The motive behind the plan 11.4 The partition 11.5 The miscalculation of the government 11.6 Boycott, Swadeshi and national education 11.7 The Samitis and the political trends 11.8 The concept of mass movement, workers and peasants 11.8.1 Workers 11.8.2 Peasants 11.9 The communal tangle 11.10 The rise of revolutionary terrorism 11.11 Let's sum up 11.12 Keywords 11.13 Answers to check your progress exercises 11 Objectives. This unit attempts to place before you the factors which prompted the British to partition Bengal in 1905. It also gives an account of the intense nationalist reaction the move evoked and spells out the changes Swadeshi movement brought about in the content and forms of the Indian struggle for freedom. After reading this unit, you will be able to explain the background in which Indian nationalists and British authorities confronted each other, identify the motives behind the scheme for partitioning Bengal, discuss how the Swadeshi movement grew and what political trends and techniques it developed, appreciate the strength of the movement as well as the difficulties it encountered, and finally, make an oral assessment of the historic phenomenon. 11.1 Introduction. The enthusiasm of the articulate representatives of the educated middle class, the newly acclaimed leaders of Indian society, appears to have considerably diminished by the close of 19th century. Personalities like Gladstone in Britain and Lord Ripon in India, who realized the importance of the educated Indians and sympathized with their aspirations, were no longer at the helm of affairs. Instead, men who distrusted them without exception and who disliked any relaxation of Britain's imperialistic hold over India were in charge of the governance of India. The authorities tended to ignore the Indian opinions and turned a blind eye to the acts of racial arrogance by the officials. They even tried to undermine those nominal concessions which had grudgingly been conceded to Indians from time to time in the earlier period. The hostility of the Raj was becoming apparent even to the earlier nationalists. Many of them had realized by 1900 the futility of their petitioning and praying to the government. Their very modest demands for jobs in the Indian civil service and some reforms in the legislative councils had practically been disregarded. The appeal for a just British rule in India in place of the prevailing un-British misrule fell on deaf ears. The demands for constitutional concessions that had repeatedly been made from the Indian National Congress platform for about 2 decades produced only the paltry reforms of 1892. The situation was considerably worsened in the early years of 20th century due to the presence in India of a viceroy like Lord Curzon, who wanted to treat the Congress as an unclean thing, reject all its pleaders' lees with frigid indifference, and considered the civil service as one specifically reserved for the Europeans. Like all staunch imperialists, Curzon was an unqualified racist, proclaiming that the highest ideal of truth is to a large extent a Western concept, and speaking of Indians in his benevolent mood in tones one normally reserves for pet animals. Alarmed and ruffled by the Curzonian presence, as the earlier nationalists were, they were not so dispirited as to swallow every humiliation or to lie ignominiously low. They had grown in stature in the eyes of their own people, learned from their social reformers and ideologue to have faith in themselves, and acquired sufficient amount of self-respect to ask for civilized treatment and natural justice. A confrontation between Curzon and the educated middle class nationalists therefore was bound to take place. It eventually did in Bengal. where the Indian intelligentsia was more assertive and where Curzon was at its offensive worst. Curzon was the first to start his attack in Bengal. As early as 1899, he reduced the number of elected members in the Calcutta Corporation. This measure was intended primarily to satisfy the European business interest in the city, who often complained of delays in the grant of licenses and similar other facilities. The consideration behind the action was obvious, and its undemocratic nature was unmistakable. The Calcutta citizens felt deeply offended and wronged. However, before they could digest this wrong, Curzon launched an assault on the autonomous character of Calcutta University, the pride of educated sections in Bengal. Armed with the recommendations of Indian Universities Commission, whose sole Indian member, Gurudas Banerjee, disagreed wholly with the others, Curzon passed the Universities Act 1904. The objective used as a pretext was to raise the standard and education all round. The act cut down the number of elected Senate members, mostly Indians, and transferred the ultimate power of affiliating colleges and schools, as well as giving them grants and aid to the government officials. This piece of legislation left the outraged members of the educated middle class in no doubt about the viceroy's determination to hurt them and break their spirit in every conceivable way. They naturally had to prepare themselves mentally for the worst and think in terms of offering resistance. The worst, as it turned out, came rather quickly and dramatically in July 1905 when Curzon announced the partition of Bengal. 11.2 The plan for the partition of Bengal. The province of Bengal, under a lieutenant governor, was an unwieldy territory of diverse population using various languages and dialects and differing widely in terms of economic development. Apart from Bengal proper, that is, Bengali speaking Western and Eastern Bengal, it originally comprised the whole of Bihar, Orissa, and Assam. Earlier, too, the British authorities did occasionally think of reducing the size of the province for administrative convenience. In 1874, they actually separated Assam from Bengal by making it a chief commissioner's province and adding to it, despite some local opposition, the predominantly Bengali speaking area of Sylhet. Assam was further extended in 1897 by the transfer for the time being of South Lushai Hills tract from Bengal. Such piecemeal reductions, however, had not conclusively solved the British difficulty in managing a province of the proportion of Bengal with all its attendant problems. From the administrative point of view, as well as from the angle of equal development opportunities for all areas, some sort of territorial or reorganization of the province of Bengal was therefore needed. Curzon did not appear to be thinking unreasonably when he talked about readjustments of Bengal early in 1904. If he had ever thought of streamlining the province by dissociating the linguistically divergent Orissa and Bihar from it, as it was so aptly and repeatedly advocated by the nationalists themselves, Curzon's policy would probably have been hailed as an principled and far-sighted one. Instead, he and his main advisers, Sir A. Fraser, the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, and H.S. Risley, Secretary, Home Department, Government of India, were determined to use the plea for territorial readjustment to throttle the voice of nationalism. The move was calculated to hurt chiefly those who spearheaded the national movement in the eastern part of India, namely the Bengali speaking educated middle class. Having been the first to be brought under British rule, the Bengalis were among the pioneers in taking to English education, imbibing Western liberal ideas, and airing nationalistic and patriotic views. This annoyed the imperialistic authorities and they decided to take action. 11.3 the motive behind the plan. In the eyes of Curzon and others like him, Bengal was the most vulnerable point in the entire British Empire. In their view, the Bengalis were a force already formidable and certain to be a source of increasing trouble in the future. To meet the growing nationalist challenge in the eastern India, Curzon and his advisors searched for an effective answers and eventually found it in the division of the Bengali speaking people. The official assessment was Bengal united is a power, Bengal divided will pull in several different ways. Curzon and company were determined to split up and thereby weaken a solid body of opponents to the British rule. The splitting up of operations or the arrangement for giving effect to maxim divide and rule had to be done in such a manner as to make the Bengalis suffer physical as well as mental division. This Curzon wanted to achieve by creating a situation of mutual suspicion and jealousy between the two major communities in Bengal, the Hindus and the Muslims. Curzon and his advisors knew that the opponents in Bengal came largely from among the Hindus who had benefited more than their Muslim brethren by taking socio-economic and educational advantage of the British rule. Majority of Muslims, being agriculturalists, could not manage to take similar advantage. By shrewdly suggesting that his government wished to stand by the Muslims in their race for advancement with the Hindus and secure them from any threat of Hindu domination, Curzon planned to take away from Bengal those territories where Muslims were more numerous and join this with Assam to form a new province with Dhaka as its capital. The new province, Curzon hoped, would invest the Mohammedans in eastern Bengal with a unity which they have not enjoyed since the days of old Musalman viceroys and kings. He also expected Dhaka to acquire the special character of a provincial capital where Mohammedan interest would be strongly represented, if not predominant. By partitioning Bengal, therefore, Curzon and his lieutenants wanted to set up Dhaka as a parallel political center to the nationalistically oriented Calcutta. To make use of the Muslims to counterbalance the Hindus, they intended to create out of Bengal a Muslim majority province where 15 million Muslims would live with 12 million Hindus and reduce the Bengali speaking people into a minority in what would remain as Bengal, where 19 million Bengali speaking persons should be outnumbered by 35 million speakers of Hindi, Oriya, and other languages. This mischievous game was being played above all to cripple the educated Indian middle class nationalist. 11.4 The Partition. The Curzonian scheme to partition Bengal took a concrete shape gradually from the time the Viceroy wrote his minute on territorial redistribution on June 1st, 1903, to the day the final scheme of division was dispatched to the Home authorities in London for sanction on 2nd February 1905. On 19th July 1905, the Government of India announced its decision to form the new province of Eastern Bengal and Assam, comprising the Chittagong, Dhaka, and Rajashahi divisions, Hiltapera, Tripura, Malda, and Assam. The province came into existence on 16th October 1905 by breaking up Bengal and its 41.5 million Bengali speaking people. Check your progress 1. 1. Which of the following statements are correct or wrong? When Bengal was being partitioned, 1. Lord Curzon was the Viceroy of India. 2. Sir A. Fraser was the Secretary, Home Department, Government of India. 3. H.S. Risley was the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal. 4. Bihar and Orissa were separate provinces. 2. What was Curzon's real motive in partitioning Bengal? Answer in about 10 lines. 11.5 The miscalculation of the government. Even while dividing Bengal most impudently and with contempt for the Bengalis, Curzon and his men made their own calculations about the kind of resistance they may have to face. They knew about worries of the Babus in eastern Bengal over the prospect of clerical jobs. They were also aware of the difficulty the Bengali zamindars, having estates in both eastern and western parts, had to face over the increased expenses for engaging two sets of agents and pleaders. The Calcutta High Court lawyers, they knew, will feel concerned over the loss of practice because of a separate High Court in the new province. They would think of the anxieties of the jute and rice trading interest near the port of Calcutta or the challenge that Chittagong might pose as an alternative outlet. They also knew how Calcutta nationalists might feel disturbed on account of the loss of a considerable portion of their audience and following. But they expected all worries to subside in course of time, or at most to lead for a while only to protest meetings and processions that could easily be tolerated and ignored. The government had no idea whatsoever of the stormy political movement which the partition would cause, breaking it away from the traditional ways of respectful resentment, generating unprecedented militancy, and turning it rapidly into a battle for Swaraj or self rule. The authorities grossly underestimated the Bengali dislike for authoritarianism, which had been produced among them by their long history of virtual independence from nominal central powers. They also failed to grasp the Bengali feeling for unity and pride in their attainments, at least among the literates, which had been fostered by intense educational, intellectual, and cultural activities during the whole of 19th century. Apart from its being the center of economic and political affairs, the metropolis of Calcutta, the capital of British India, had already become the nerve center of Bengali consciousness. It drew students from all parts of Bengal, sent out teachers, professionals, engineers, and doctors, and petty officials to every nook and corner of the province, often far beyond it. Calcutta had made a significant contribution to the growth of a powerful literary language. The city had an increasing number of high level newspapers and periodicals, as well as a band of writers who were producing developed modern literature. With their gravitational point in Calcutta, the educated Bengalis were at the beginning of 20th century inspiring large part of the countries by their achievements in literature, led by Rabindranath Tagore, in science, led by Jagdish Chandra Bose and Prafulla Chandra Roy, in politics, led by Surendranath Banerjee and the upcoming Bipin Chandra Pal and Aurobindo Ghosh, and religion, typified by Swami Vivekananda. Almost at the same time, they were making careful note of the chinks that the Boer War had revealed in the so called impenetrable British armour. They also felt greatly elated and assured when much underrated Oriental Japan defeated in 1904-05 the overrated Occidental Tsarist Russia. Their rising self confidence was matched by the growing abhorrence with which they looked down upon all the acts of racial intimidation and discrimination. The educated middle class Indians in Bengal, like their counterparts in the rest of country, were severely critical of the drain of wealth from India to Britain and of the ravages which India suffered on account of frequent recurrence of famine and plague. They themselves were hard hit economically, partly because of overcrowding in the professions and partly due to the unremunerative fragmentation through inheritance of their landed properties. To make matters worse, there was a sudden rise in prices of all commodities that affected everybody, including the members of middle class, the rise being steepest between 1905 and 1908, precisely the years of maximum political unrest. Sumit Sarkar, Modern Indian 1885 to 1947, Delhi 1983, page 109. In sum, one could say that Bengal and the Bengali middle class in 1905 were by no means in a mood to surrender to the Curzonian assault, but the Curzon himself did not seem to be adequately aware of it.
Boycott Swadeshi and National Education, Unit 11.6. The anti partition agitation began in Bengal on the conventional moderate nationalist lines. Though, with great deal of noise and angry protestations, there were sharp press campaigns against the partition scheme, numerous public meetings in the opposition to it, and the drafting of petitions to the governments for its annulment. Big conferences were held in the town hall, Calcutta, where delegates from districts came to participate and gave vent to their injured sentiments. All this was impressive, making the educated middle classes' case against the partition loud and clear. But it made no effect to the indifference of the authorities in India and Britain. The evident failure of these methods, therefore, led to search for new techniques from the middle of 1905 and resulted in the discovery of boycott of British goods as an effective weapon. The boycott suggestion first came from Krishna Kumar Mitra's Sanjeevani on 3rd of July 1905 and was later accepted by the prominent public men at the town hall meeting of 7th of August 1905. The discovery was followed by the calls of Rabindranath Tagore and Ramendra Sundar Trivedi, respectively, for the observance of Raksha Bandhan, that is, the tying of thread wristlets on each other's hands as a symbol of brotherhood, and Arandhan, that is, keeping of the hearth unlit. Hearth is a traditional diya at all the homes as a sign of mourning. On the day of partition was put into effect. With these measures, the movement gained new fervor. The boycott of British products was followed by point 1, the advocacy of Swadeshi, or exhorting purchasers to buy indigenously produced goods as a patriotic duty. Second, the charkha, that is, spinning wheel, came to typify the popular concern for the country's economic self sufficiency. And third, holding of Swadeshi melas or fairs for selling handicrafts and other articles became a regular feature. A considerable enthusiasm was created for undertaking Swadeshi or Indian enterprises. A number of exclusively Indian industrial ventures such as Calcutta Batteries, Bengal Chemicals, Bonj Lakshmi Cotton Mills, Mohini Mills, and National Tannery were started. Various soap, matchbox, and tobacco manufacturing establishments and oil mills, as well as financial activities like the Swadeshi and banks insurance and steam navigation companies also took off the ground under the impetus generated by the movement. Meanwhile, the picketing before the shops selling British goods soon led to boycott of officially controlled educational institutions. The British threat to the student picketers in the form of withdrawal of grants, scholarships, and affiliations of the institutions to which they belong through the infamous circular of 2nd of October 1905 issued by Carlyle, the Chief Secretary of the Government of Bengal, otherwise known as the Carlyle Circular, and the actual imposition of fines and rustication orders on them resulted in the decision by a large number of students to leave the schools and colleges of slavery. Boycott of schools and colleges forced the leader of the Swadeshi movement to think in terms of running a parallel system of education in Bengal. Soon, appeals were made, donations were collected, and distinguished persons came forward to formulate programs for national education. These efforts resulted in the establishment of Bengal Technical Institute, which was started on 25th of July 1906, which later turned into the College of Engineering and Technology, Jadavpur, the nucleus of the present day Jadavpur University, the Bengal National College and School, which was set up on 15th of August 1906 with Aurobindo Ghosh as its principal, and a number of national primary and secondary schools in the districts. Unit 11.7, the Samitis and the Political Trends. For aiding the cause of national education and for spreading the message of boycott and Swadeshi, the large number of national volunteer bodies or Samitis sprang up in Calcutta and districts. Some of the distinguished among them were the Dawn Society, named after the famous journal of all time, Dawn, the Anti-Circular Society, formed initially to protest against the Carlisle Circular, the Swadesh Dhandav, the Brati, the Anushilin, the Suhrid, and the Sadhana Samitis. These Samitis preached the essentials of Swadeshi and boycott, took up social work during the families and the epidemics, imparted physical and moral training. Organized crafts and national schools were set up, arbitration committees and village societies. They encouraged folk singers and artists, notably persons like Mukunda Das, Bhushan Das, and Muzifuddin Bayati, to perform the Swadeshi themes in local dialects. These efforts served to implement the rural level and the spate of patriotic compositions by literal stalwarts. Stalwarts is someone who is loyal and hardworking. By literal stalwarts like Rabindranath Tagore, Rajnikanta Sen, Dwijendral Roy, Girindra Mohini Dasi, Syed Abu Muhammad, or playwrights like Girish Chandra Ghosh, Krishodev Prasad, Vidya Vinod, and Amritlal Bose. The ideologies of Samitis range from secularism to various revivalism, from moderate policies to social reform, though conservative, economic, educational, and social programs. And included their range political extremism. As a matter of fact, several trends of political thinking were competing with one another for popular acceptance during the Swadeshi days in Bengal. Point number 1. The moderate nationalist movement, which was represented by persons like Surendranath Banerjee, Krishna Kumar Mitra, and Narendra Kumar Sen, still had abiding faith in the British sense of justice and were not in favor of stretching the agitation too far. Its advocates actually pinned their hopes on the Liberal Morley's appointment as Secretary of State for India in Britain. Their lukewarmness was so obviously out of tune with the prevailing militant mood against the British authorities that the moderates rapidly and conclusively lost their popularity. Point number 2. The second, or the social reform creed of constructive Swadeshi, as it was termed, aimed at gathering of national strength through a persistent movement of self-help and self-reliance, or Atma Shakti, according to Rabindranath Tagore, by organizing indigenous enterprises, nationalistic educational processes, and setting up village uplift societies to bridge the gulf between rural and urban people. All those who did not see eye to eye with the moderate nationalists supported the cause of constructive Swadeshi in the beginning. Satish Chandra Mukherjee, Ashwini Kumar Datta, Rabindranath Tagore, Prafulla Chandra Roy, and Nilratan Sarkar were its prime adherents. Even though the program recommended by the social reformist was significant in some ways, it was too arduous, unostentatious, and unexciting. Unostentatious means one that is not that big to have wide appeal in these heady days. It could neither match the exuberance of political leaders like Bepi Chandra Pal, Aurobindo Ghosh, and Brahma Bandhav Upadhyaya, nor satisfying the impatient, adventurous youth of Bengal. In such circumstances, the appearance of political extremism, the third trend, was natural. It found expression in periodicals like New India, edited by Bepi Chandra Pal, Bande Mataram, edited by Aurobindo Ghosh, Sandhya, edited by Brahma Bandhav Upadhyaya, and Yugantar, edited by Bhupendranath Datta. The political extremists demanded self government for India, not under the British tutelage or British paramountcy, that is the British rule, as the moderates wished, but by severing all serving all the British connections and wiping off the British influences. The extremist political leaders gave a clarion call for the establishment of Swaraj and attempted to find the ways and means for achieving it. They speedily came to the conclusion that the techniques of boycott should be escalated from British goods and educational institutions to other spheres such as British administration, British courts of law, and British services, shaking the foundation of British authority in India. Bepi Chandra Pal described as escalation as passive resistance or refusal to render any voluntary honorary service to the government. Aurobindo Ghosh improved the strategy further in a series of articles in Bande Mataram in April 1907 and came out with a theory of organized and relentless boycott of British goods. British system of education, judiciary and executive, and the social boycott of the loyalist and civil disobedience of unjust laws. If British repressions surpassed the limits of Indian endurance, Aurobindo Ghosh was prepared to embark on an anti-British armed struggle. How could British rule in India continue? Brahma Bandhav Upadhyaya asked if the Chaukidar, the constable, the deputy, the munishif, and the clerk, not to speak of the sepoy, and resigned their respective functions. The fervour with which the exponents of political extremism brought the issues of Swaraj and attainment through passive resistance to the fore relegated all the points of the background, including the very question, and occasioned the agitation of the partition of Bengal. In comparison with the importance of the struggle for Swaraj, the unification of Bengal seemed only a secondary issue. The pettiest and the narrowest of all political objects. Aurobindo Ghosh's article in Bande Mataram on 28th of April 1907, such nationalization of a regional issue and the clarification of national goal accompanying it marked the most extraordinary advancements that Indian nationalists were able to make within the brief animated span of merely 2 years. Unit 11.8, The Mass Movement, Workers and Peasants. The national goal of Swaraj and the means to achieve it through boycott in all spheres or through the method of passive resistance, as it was then formulated, necessitated not only a widespread awakening of the masses but also their wholehearted participation in well organized anti British mass movements. The educated middle class had by and large awakened with the progress of Swadeshi movement, and even some members of the landed aristocracy and the representatives of commercial and mercantile interests were being sympathetic to the national cause. But the vast majority of the poor classes, especially the working class and the peasantry, had not yet been brought in the thick of the struggle. 11.8.1 Workers. Some of the Swadeshi workers, notably Ashwini Kumar Banerjee, Prabhat Kusum Roy Chaudhary, Athanasius Apurva Kumar Ghosh, and Prematosh Bose, did, however, try to organize workers in Bengal and direct their economic grievances into political channels. The lead in the direction came from 247 clerks of Burn Company in Howrah who struck work in September 1905 in protest against derogatory new work regulation. This was followed by strikes in the tramways in Calcutta, in the jute mills and railway workshops, coolies and carters and sweepers who also took recourse to strike in Calcutta to voice their economic demands. Such great politicization was noticed among one more militant printing press, jute mill and railway workers. A bitter strike in the government owned presses resulted in the formation of the first real labor union, namely the Printers' Union in October 05, 1905. A similar struggle of employees of the Eastern Railway saw the organization of the Railway Payment Union in July 1906. There were attempts on the part of Swadeshi leaders like Bipin Chandrapal, Shyamasundar Chakraborty, and Liaquat Hussain to organize agitated railway workers in Asansol, Raigunj, and Jamalpur, which ended up in police firing at the Jamalpur workshop on 27th August 1906. The jute workers who agitated almost on similar lines from 1905 were led by Ashwini Kumar Banerjee to form an Indian Mill Hands Union at the Baj in August 1906. However, all these unions later on suffered a setback in the face of hospitality of the government. Not being ideologically committed to the cause of the workers, the enthusiasm of the nationalists in activating them steadily subsidized after 1907. 11.8.2 Peasants. Workmen, they practically refrained from rallying the peasants, although the Samitis had numerous branches in the rural areas, like the Swadesh Bandhav Samiti, which alone had 175 village branches in the Barisal district, preaching passive resistance to the masses. They failed to stir up the peasants' imagination to the bulk of improvised kisans. Their patriotic calls remained vague, distant, and even abstractly rhetorical. The reason was lack of genuine interest among those leaders in improving those agrarian situation or in formulating concrete programs for the betterment of the peasant masses. The member of middle class in Bengal, whether professionals, clerks, or businessmen, depended substantially for their economic well being on the rentals of their ancestral lands. Their entire character had therefore placed them into an exploitative category vis-a-vis exploited peasantry, and had perpetuated a contradiction between their interest and the peasants' aspirations. Already, the Bengali middle class had not generally approved of the meager territorial rights which the government had conceded to the cultivators in the Tenancy Act of 1885. Its representatives had often been intolerant to the insolvent rayats as as bhadraloks, that is gentlemen. They were contemptuous to the chotoloks, that is lowly men, chotoloks. The Swadeshi movement did not raise any voice of protest against the peasants' burden of death, his periodic eviction from land, or against his continued subjection to beggar, unpaid forced labor. No Samiti gave any call to the cultivators for launching any agitation on the issues of exorbitant tax and rent. Even a radical spokesman of the stature of the Aurobindo Ghosh expressly ruled out such campaigns lest they should hurt the interest of patriotic zamindars. Aurobindo Ghosh's article in Bande Mataram, April 1907. What was worse, the strong religious overtone that the Swadeshi movement acquired in the course of time, its undue emphasis on Hindu re- revivalistic symbols and idioms, largely discouraged the Muslim peasants, who form the bulk of peasantry in East Bengal, from taking a lively interest in the Great Commotion. Unit 11.9, the Communal Triangle. In traditional societies, religion has often been used as a convenient means to arouse an indigenous and popular band of nationalism, and it has usually led to unfortunate consequences. The experience of Swadeshi movement was no different. The political capital that the leaders in Bengal tried to make out of Hinduism and Islam contributed in effect to the widening of the gulf between two major communities were dividing the land and the people of Bengal and playing the Hindu and Muslims against each other were the known British imperialistic ideas. These were taken up 1905 by Curzon, Sir Andrew Fraser, and Sir Herbert Risley. As it has already been pointed out, and their successors like Lord Minto, who replaced Curzon as the Viceroy, Sir Bamplified Fuller, who was appointed as the first Lieutenant Governor of East Bengal and Assam, Sir Lancelot Hare, who came in place of Fuller, devoutly clung to the same methods, while Minto was convinced of the necessity of the diminution of the powers of the Bengali politicians. Fuller actually started playing one of the two sections of the population, Hindus and Muslims, against each other, and Hare thought of giving extraordinary advantages to the Muslims in matters of government jobs over Hindus. Simultaneously, with the wooing of the educated Muslims, and authorities encouraged to aristocratic elements among them to think the terms of Muslim political power and to form in October 1906 the Muslim League under the leadership of Nawab Salimullah of Dhaka to protect separate interests of Muslims. Beside the eastern Bengal countryside, the obscurantists, mullahs, and Maulavis wielded, wielded much influence and often projected the contradiction between the zamindars, majority who of them happened to be Hindus, and cultivators, majority who happened to be Muslims, in terms of religious and agnosticism. Antagonism, that means somebody. Despite all this, however, eloquent pleas were heard during the Swadeshi movement in the favor of communal harmony, such as writings in Sanjeevani. Great scenes of Hindu Muslim fraternization were witnessed, such as a joint procession of 10,000 students in Calcutta on 23rd September 1906. Some distinguished Muslim policemen took up leading roles in the agitation, such as Laikat Hussain, Abdul Hakim Ghaznavi, Abdul Rasul, Maniruzuman, Ismail Hussain Siraji, Abdul Hussain, and Din Mohammed. But much of the effect of these positive developments were neutralized by the educated middle class nationalist attempts by utilizing the rites, images, and myths of Hindu orthodoxy as a moral booster for their rank and file as a medium of communication between the leaders and the led. The stridently Hinduized exhortations of the nationalist organizations like Bande Mataram, Sandhya, and Nab Shakti, the uncritical glorification of Hindu past, the nostalgia for the lost Hindu Rashtra nation, the practice of taking pledge of Swadeshi for not using British goods before a Hindu deity, the vow of self practice before the goddess Kali, and the constant reference of the Gita did not help the political leaders in bringing the Muslims closer to the Hindus. Rather, these contributed in hardening of attitudes on part of both communities. The observance of Brihaspati in the memory of eight Hindu heroes of the medieval past, the emphasis of traditional Hindu values in programs for national education, the use of Puranic images on the public platform, the insistence on the goddess Durga being the visible representations of eternal spirit of the Bengalis harmed a movement considerably by the projection of its content in religious form. Bipichandra Pal justified such misinterpretation on the ground that religion and national life were inseparable, and that to separate national life from religion would mean the abandonment of religions and moral values in personal life also. Sumit Sarkar, the Swadeshi movement in Bengal 1903 to 1908, Delhi 1977, Brahmabandhav Upadhyaya went a step further and urged his audience, whatever you hear, whatever you learn, whatever you do, remain a Hindu, remain a Bengali. Aurobindo Ghosh, editor Bande Mataram, went to farthest point when he discovered the gems of democracy, of even socialism in the caste rules of Hindu society, caste and democracy, Bande Mataram, 21st September 1907. Such Hindu ritualistic propaganda at the height of the agitation, and that too by its leading figure, actually incited Nawab Saimulia's men and the mullahs to spread communal hatred among the Muslims in accordance of the course, such as Curzon expectations. It was comparatively easy in such circumstances for the communalists to take recourse to communal violence. The eastern part of Bengal saw a serious series of communal riots, first in Ishwargunj in Maimer Singh district in May 1906, followed by disturbances in Komila, Jamalpur, Devangange and Bakshi in March 1907, and then again in Mymensingh in April-May 1907. The writers were encouraged by the rumors spread by the communalists of the British decision to hand over the charge of administration in Dhaka to Nawab Salimullah. The riots also revealed a submerged agitation character, since the targets were often found to be Hindu zamindars and Mahajans, moneylenders. Although they were alarmed by these untoward developments, the nationalists would not try to understand the entire phenomena correctly. They seemed to be in a hurry to brand the rioters merely as British hired troublemakers without any serious effort and understanding the depth of malice. Malice is something that is false. As a result, their religious fervor continued to increase further than decrease. Unit 11.10, The Rise of Revolutionary Terrorism. A large-scale participation in the masses in the struggle of Swaraj, the essential precondition of a successful passive resistance, was not, however, realized. With little success among the workers, a total failure in respect of the cultivators, and sad mismanagement of the communal tangle, the Swadeshi movement was unable by a second half of 1907 to rise to its full potential or assume the character of mass upheaval. Besides, as an anti imperialistic agitation of great intensity, it had to bear continuously the repressive measures of its powerful opponent. The authorities prohibited the shouting of the slogan Bande Mataram in public spaces, disqualified from the government unemployment of all those who took part in the agitation in any form, and expelled and fined students' participation in the movement. Bands of Gurkha soldiers who were sent to the Barisil and the other places to teach the agitators a lesson, and the police and the officials were given a free hand to heap indignities and launch physical assaults on them. The climax was reached in April 1906 when the delegates attending a provincial conference in Barisil were lathi charged by the police. Then followed measures like exemplary caning of the picketers and institution of cases against them, banning of public meetings and processions, and innumerable arrests and convictions of persons, including Bipin Chandra Pal and Liaquat Hussain. The question of meeting force with force using terror against terror naturally came to the forefront. A violent method also appealed to the romantic recklessness of the middle class youth of Bengal, who sought solace in heroic individual acts when the mass actions did not materialize, and who pinned their hopes on the secret societies when open politics could not overwhelm the government. The cult of violence was also attractive to those who were hurry who are in a desperate hurry and whose patience had practically run out. If we sit idle and hesitate to rise till the whole population is goaded to desperation, Yuganthar argued in August 1907, then we shall continue idle till the end of the time. The alternative for this was advanced elite section to take up arms against oppressors, strike terror in the hearts of the hated British officials and then henchmen, and arouse the masses by death defying examples. Soon, some of the Samitis grew exclusive inner circles, hatched conspiracies for selective assassinations, and committed political robberies for raising funds to buy arms and ammunition. These militant proceedings were spearheaded by the Yugantar Group in Calcutta and Anushilan Samiti in Dhaka. Prafulla Chaki died and Khudirban Bose, a boy of 18, were hanged for their attempt on life of notorious British magistrate King Ford, who escaped unhurt. It also led in April 1908 to the discovery of secret bomb manufacturing factory in Manikatla area of Calcutta and also to sensational asserts of some hardcore militants, including Aurobindo Ghosh. Revolutionary terrorism, however, took this setback in the stride. It continued to operate, even spread in the other parts of India and abroad, as the clandestine legacy of the momentous uproarious Swadeshi movement. Unit 11.11. Let us sum up. The growth of revolutionary terrorism had certainly disturbed the British in India, but it could not challenge their authority as the open politics of Swadeshi did, nor could it seriously threaten their rule as an ever expanding mass mobilization might have done. Swadeshi movement failures to assume the stature of mass upsurge and the fact of its being eventually cornered into a secretive position where manifestations of the presence of some of the weaknesses and the limitations. But despite its many weaknesses, the degree of success achieved at the levels of ideology, organizations, and techniques of political struggle was not only outstanding but also innovative and in some respects far in advance in its time. Swadeshi movement marked a total reversal of earlier nationalist approach of petitioning and praying to the Raj of concessions, as well as virtual rejections of the moderate political program. It set before the Indian people the goal of Swaraj or independence and committed them to ask the task of doing away with British imperialistic stranglehold over India. For attainment of Swaraj, it charted out the nation and the path of passive resistance or civil disobedience of the British authority and relegated constitutionalism of a secondary position. The success of such resistance being conditional on extensive participation of masses, the Swadeshi movement struggled hard to gain a popular base, and despite its failure to become full fledged mass upsurge, it nevertheless succeeded in leaving behind for the posterity of the ideal of wide mass spread struggle. With all these, and also with the scheme of constructive Swadeshi, the movement clearly anticipated the Gandhian message mass struggles of the post First World War period, bearing the principle of non-violence. Gandhi's inspiring call from 1920 onwards for achieving Swaraj through non cooperation, civil disobedience, and constructive programs resembled closely with boycott, passive resistance, and constructive Swadeshi of the Bengali political scenario preached and practiced 15 years ago. The Swadeshi movement had put up the stiffest Indian resistance to the government of arch imperialistic like Curzon, and after its departure from India in November 1905 to the succeeding government of Minto, uh, it became a contributing factor in the resignation of Fuller. The Lieutenant Governor of Bengal and Assam in August 1906 had forced the authorities eventually to annul the participation and reunify Bengal in 1911. However, they were hardly its major achievements in larger nationwide context. Its chief success lay in giving Indian nationalism a new imaginative direction and in raising the state and the nationalist unrest to the high plane of bitter anti imperialistic struggles. As it invariably happens in all cases of political and social turmoil, a Swadeshi movement also left its deep marks on the cultural and intellectual activities of Bengal, with their fallout spread over different parts of the country. Apart from rich crop of patriotic composition, playwritings and dramatic performances, it generated the Bengal School of Painting under the leadership of Rabindranath Tagore, kindled scientific enquiries under the supervision of Jagdish Chandra Bose and Prafulla Chandra Roy, revived interest of the folk traditions of the labors of Dinesh Chandra Sen, and invigorated historical research with the help of findings of Rakhaldas Banerjee, Hari Prasad Shastri, and Akshay Kumar Maitra. 11.12 unit, that is the keywords. First keyword, authori authoritarianism, that is Authorianism. The meaning is a phenomenon in which authority is imposed without taking out the proper will. Number 2, ideologues, that is Ideologues. The meaning is people who are involved in propagating certain ideology. Number 3, political extremism. Political extremism. The phenomenon in which ultra militant methods are used to solve political problems. Number 4, politicization. Politicization, meaning a process by which politics becomes a part of the way people think about life. Number 5, racial arrogance. RACIALARROGANCE, that is feeling of racial superiority over others. Number 6, religious revivalism. RELIGIOUS a phenomenon in which the religious past is totally evoked to justify certain present objectives or notions.